So today we begin our study of the new subject, Sri Shankaracharya's celebrated Vivekachudamani. As you all know, Vivekachudamani happens to be one of the best known and best loved classics of Advaita Vedanta. I chose this work after considerable thought because we are all mostly followers of Vedanta here. Not just in the academic sense, but more as sincere, serious spiritual seekers who accept the spirit of Vedanta. No matter what religion we belong to, we here are all attracted by the universal principles of Vedanta. We would like to live and shape our spiritual life according to the life-giving teachings of Vedanta. And this Vivekachudamani happens to be just the kind of text meant for aspirants like us. The emphasis in this work is more on spiritual practice than in most other major works of Shankaracharya. Shankaracharya's major works are his great commentaries. They are great, no doubt, but they are more philosophical. But his minor works are more related to spiritual practice. But before we actually commence our study of the book, let us first of all offer our humble salutations to the great Acharya as a mark of our deep gratitude. Because, after all, the teachings contained in this book are supposed to show us the way out of samsara, to set us free forever. So let us remember that this book is a product not only of Shankaracharya's realizations, but also his compassion for struggling souls like us. So our salutations to him first. One pranama mantra, that is, salutation mantra, which is addressed to Shankaracharya, that is both short and widely popular. The mantra runs like this: Shruti Smriti Purananam Alayam Karunalayam Namami Bhagavat Padam Shankaram Loka Shankaram. Shruti Smriti Purananam Alayam Karunalayam Namami Bhagavat Padam Shankaram Loka Shankaram. I bow down to the holy feet of the venerable, godlike Shankaracharya, who is a temple of divine knowledge. That is to say, the very embodiment of the spiritual knowledge that is contained in the Shruti, Smritis, Puranas and other scriptures. Who is the abode, the very personification of compassion, Karunalayam, and who brings welfare to the world, who is a blessing to humanity. So this is the Shankaracharya we bow down to in all humility. Shankaracharya was not a mere philosopher or even a sage or a mystic. Of course, he was all these, but he was first and foremost a divine incarnation. He came down to revive, to re-establish Vedic religion and spirituality. So he taught a way of life that we will have to lead if we want to know the spirit of the Vedas and the Upanishads, if we want to realize the true nature of ourselves, to know who or what we really are. A life dedicated to understanding the principles of Vedanta Even more importantly, a life dedicated to putting these principles of Vedanta into practice in actual life. Well, we can imagine the difficulty of it. So, Shankaracharya wrote elaborate commentaries on the major Upanishads, the Bhagavad Gita, and the Brahma Sutras. This he did in order to show people that the central truth of these great scriptures was the philosophy of non-duality, Advaita. That was his purpose. The style of these lengthy commentaries that has been described as prasanna gambhira, lucid and profound. The description itself is beautiful. Prasanna gambhira, lucid, profound. Unfortunately, however, this clarity and depth of these great commentaries cannot be fully appreciated by people like us. Because we are not proficient in Sanskrit, we are not trained in Vedic studies, we are not so very knowledgeable about the different systems of philosophy. Most of us don't meet the necessary requirements. But thankfully, great souls, divine incarnations like Shankaracharya, they don't come for pandits. They come mainly for spiritual seekers. This is something we'll have to keep in mind. We know what an intense life Shankaracharya lived. He lived and worked during the most critical time in India's religious history. In a short span of just 32 years, he wrote all his great commentaries, which is said to have finished before he was even 16. Then he traveled the length and breadth of India, faced opponents of different philosophical schools in open debates. He faced them all, refuted their views, and established the supremacy of Advaita Vedanta. And in this way, he saved Vedic culture from degeneration. Still, in the midst of this ceaseless activity, he still found the time to write a large number of small philosophical works, simple philosophical works, prakarana granthas. Then he composed prayers and hymns to almost all the major Hindu gods and goddesses, which are all of great spiritual inspiration. This is what I want to draw your attention to. Shankaracharya did not come only for learned intellectuals. He also came for simple spiritual seekers, sincere spiritual seekers. So his personality has two main aspects, a social and a spiritual. In one of his essays, Swami Nikhilanandaji observes, we see in Shankaracharya the unusual combination of philosopher and poet, savant and saint, mystic and reformer, debater of rare analytic power, and a passionate lover of God. So Shankaracharya was all these in one person. Now, I just mentioned the Prakarana Granthas, minor works. What exactly are they? You know that the three sources, the three authoritative scriptures, canonical texts of Vedanta philosophy are the Upanishads, the Bhagavad Gita, and the Brahma Sutras. These are the points of origin of the philosophy of Vedanta, Prasthanatraya. Prasthanatraya means literally the triad of original sources. And in his commentary, Shankaracharya gave these texts an Advaitic interpretation. And these commentaries of his have themselves become central texts in the Advaita Vedanta tradition. But one main disadvantage with these commentaries is the commentator is not independent. It may surprise you, but he has to follow the main scripture. In this case, the actual texts of the Prasthanatraya. He is not free to develop his ideas systematically, in a methodical way, step by step. This is what makes it difficult to understand the commentaries for people like us without proper preparation or without proper training. So, in order to overcome this disadvantage and to make the same Upanishadic teachings accessible to less qualified students, for these reasons, the Acharya wrote a number of treatises, Abhandlungen. Treatises means Abhandlungen, known as Prakarana Granthas. The subject matter is the same, whatever is taught in the Upanishads. The divinity of the soul, the unity of existence, the oneness of God, and the harmony of religions. The subject matter is the same, only the commentaries on the Prasthanatraya are meant for advanced students, whereas the Prakarana Granthas are meant for beginners or for spiritual aspirants. In the Prakarana Granthas, the author is independent. He has the freedom to choose any particular aspect or aspects of the main Vedantic teaching. He can give them his full attention and develop them methodically. And more than all this is where, the Prakarana Granthas is where we see the great Acharya's compassion. He comes down to our level and leads us from where we are. That is the speciality of the Prakarana Granthas, their advantage. As I said, Shankaracharya has written a number of these Prakarana Granthas, short and long, prose and verse, but all conveying the same quintessence of Advaita Vedanta. And Vivekachudamani, the crest jewel of discrimination, our subject for this series of classes, this book happens to be one of the most popular among them, if not the most. There are several reasons for its immense popularity. The language is beautiful. It is comparatively easy to understand. The text is neither too long nor too short. At 581 verses, it is exactly 119 verses shorter than the Bhagavad Gita. And as in many Upanishads and the Bhagavad Gita, the contents are presented in the form of a dialogue, an engaging dialogue between the Guru and the Shishya. The work begins with an exposition, with a dashtelum of the truths of Advaita Vedanta by the teacher and culminates in the actual ecstatic experience of those truths by the student, by the Shishya. So these are some of the main characteristics of the text that appeal to both teachers and students of Advaita Vedanta. In fact, ever since it was written, Vivekachudamani has been something of a, something of a preferred instruction manual. Teachers prefer it as an introduction in its, which is comprehensive in its nature. Of course, there are other works of Shankaracharya also that explain his Advaita ideas in a more or less similar manner. But none of them is a full, complete introduction. So, Vivekachudamani is a very good aid to teaching. And for their part, students prefer it because even though it is supposed to be a philosophical treatise, it is not too philosophical. It is not overly philosophical. No polemics here. No disputation, no controversy, no argumentation for argumentation's sake. All it does is show the way to moksha and provide plenty of inspiration and sustenance, nourishment. So, Vivekachudamani is such a simple, straightforward Advaita Vedanta textbook. If you were to ask, what does the book contain? What does it say? What is its message? This question could be answered in one short paragraph. The book contains 580 verses that cover a range of spiritual topics. Spiritual topics and their answers according to Advaita Vedanta. First, it talks about the importance of self-realization, the ways of attaining Atma-jnana, and the qualities of the Guru and the Shishya. Then it criticizes attachment to the body, to the anatman, and goes on to explain the 3 shariras, the 5 koshas, the 3 gunas, the 10 sense organs, the 5 pranas, all of which constitute the not-self, anatma. Next, it teaches how to realize the Atman as distinct from these, how to actually separate the Atman from the Anatman through reflection, meditation, and absorption. Manana, nididhyasana, and samadhi. And finally, the book describes the characteristics of an enlightened soul who is liberated even while living in the body. The characteristics of a Jivan Mukta, the living free. So we see how comprehensive the contents of the book are. So the teaching and the form and style in which all this is presented, the beautiful, simple style, this is what has made Vivekachudamani one of the most important, one of the most popular introductions to Shankaracharya's Advaita Vedanta. It is quite significant that the work is called Vivekachudamani. A Chudamani is a jewel, a gem that is worn on the top of the head. It is not only the most eye-catching, the most attractive, but the best, the most precious of all ornaments. We are spiritual aspirants, practicing poverty. What ornaments do we have? Our spiritual qualities are our real ornaments. And of those spiritual qualities, Shankaracharya says, Viveka, discrimination, is the most valuable, the most excellent. Without this basic quality of Viveka, nothing can be achieved in spiritual life. Not only in spiritual life, even in life in general. That is why Viveka is said to be the basic, the most important human quality. Viveka means a sense of judgment, the ability to distinguish between good and bad, proper and improper, right and wrong. And this capacity of discernment, Unterscheidungsvermögen oder Einsichtsfähigkeit, this capacity of discernment is a distinctly human quality. This is what sets human beings apart from animals. Animals are driven by instinct, but humans have to be guided by intelligence. There is an old Sanskrit verse which says, eating, sleeping, fear, and mating. These four are common to both animals and humans. Eating, sleeping, fear, sense enjoyment. These four things are common to both animals and humans. It is dharma, the sense of right and wrong. It is this alone that is special to humans. Without that, a human being is no better than an animal. So, dharma makes all the difference between a human and a subhuman existence. There are two other readings of this verse where the word dharma is substituted by jnana or knowledge. So, jnana is special to humans, or buddhi, intelligence. It is knowledge or intelligence that makes humans special. Whatever it is, the meaning is clear. Without a sense of judgment or understanding, a human being is as good as an animal. A great saint belonging to Shankaracharya's tradition, he used to say, those who don't study the Vivekachudamani will end up as Avivekachudamanis. Those who don't study the Vivekachudamani will end up as Avivekachudamanis. Avivekachudamanis means paragons of indiscrimination, the worst of fools. Auf Deutsch gesagt, Vorbilder der Unterscheidungslosigkeit. So that is how important this capacity of discernment is. Now, there are different levels, different functions of Viveka. We have several of them, almost half a dozen. First comes Sukha Dukkha Viveka. Will a certain thing or an action, will a certain thing or action bring me happiness or sorrow? This is the first one. Next comes Dharma Adharma Viveka. Is it good or bad, evil? Does it make me moral or immoral, virtuous or vicious? Then comes Karya Karya Viveka. Should I do it or should I not do it? This is the first level of Viveka. On this level, it has these three functions. It discriminates between happiness and sorrow, sukha, dukkha, virtue and vice, dharma, adharma, and what ought to be done and what ought not to be done, karya, akarya. Why should we practice these three Vivekas? What is the purpose? The purpose is to develop the ability to make the right choices, to choose the right course of action every time. If we don't have the habit of exercising Viveka, then we have to create that habit in order to replace the present habit of Aviveka, non-discrimination. This is the only way we can avoid wrong actions. Because wrong actions create bad samskaras, which in their turn bring bondage and pain. So this is the function of Viveka at the first level. Then on the second level, we have two more types of Viveka. First is Nitya Anitya Vastu Viveka. Is a particular thing, is a particular experience permanent or impermanent? And the second is Atma Anatma Viveka. In this psychophysical constitution of ours, who is the real self? And what is the not self? So on this second level, Viveka has two more functions. It discriminates between the eternal and the evanescent, Nitya, Anitya, and between the self and the not self, Atma, Anatma. To put it more clearly, the function of Atmanatma Viveka is to try to separate the self from what it is not. The purpose of these two Vivekas is more or less the same, to disengage us from what is impermanent. Because whatever is anitya, impermanent, is anatma. It cannot be the self. What is impermanent cannot be the self. So it has to be ultimately asat, unreal. So the impermanent is the anatma. Anitya is anatma and therefore asat. The aim of this Viveka, that is, to steadily weaken our present belief that external things and the enjoyment of those external things are permanent. That is what we believe. To gradually free the mind from its slavery to the body and its demands. At the first level, the aim was to create the habit of discrimination. On this second level, the aim is to strengthen that habit by reflecting on the impermanent, painful nature of external objects and their enjoyment. It is not only Shankaracharya who teaches this, but Patanjali and Buddha have also taught the very same thing. So what happens when we practice Nitya Nitya Vastu Viveka and Atmanatma Viveka? What happens is, the mind seeks less and less sense enjoyment. It becomes less and less outward, less and less restless. It turns more and more inward to the self, to the God within. So we see that from this level, the functions of Viveka take the form of a spiritual discipline. In the first level, the practice of Viveka is a moral, ethical discipline. But from this point, it becomes a definite Vedantic spiritual discipline. The third level is Drik Drishya Viveka. Drik Drishya Viveka. Who is the seer and what is it that is seen? The function of this Viveka is to try to separate the seer, the perceiver, the conscious spirit within, the drashta or drik, from all that is perceived. Because everything that is perceived happens to be matter, unconscious. It belongs to nature. Drishya. The aim is to ultimately discover the light of the Atman. The Atman is the higher spiritual dimension of the I, the ego. The Atman is the spiritual dimension of the ego. How? By detaching the I, by detaching the ego from both objects and thoughts, from everything that is perceived. Because except the Atman, which is the only conscious entity, everything else, gross or subtle, everything belongs to the domain of matter. This is what the Upanishads teach. But the problem is, how can this total isolation of the self-luminous Atman, the real I, how is this to be achieved even at this level of Drigdrishya Viveka? Because the ego awareness is still not transcended. The ego is still involved in the process of Drigdrishya Viveka. It is busy discriminating. So the objective of this Viveka seems to be, as we just heard, it seems to be to detach the ego from all objects and thoughts. To help us find, to help us locate the spiritual center within and concentrate on it. It points in the direction of the Atman, clearly, definitely. It points in the direction of the Atman, no doubt. But in order to transcend the ego, the seeker has to keep practicing relentless self-enquiry. One has to immerse oneself in deep meditation until the ego is transcended in samadhi. It is in samadhi that the self-luminous Atman stands revealed. Until then, the ego is very much alive. Now we have arrived at the final stage. The final stage is when self-knowledge dawns in the heart of the seeker. Here one attains what is known as Sad-asad Vastu Viveka. Sat Asat Vastu Viveka. This is the supreme Viveka. It is something that is known, not practiced. One knows what is ultimately real and what is unreal. All other types of Viveka, half a dozen of them, Sukha Dukkha Viveka, Dharma Adharma Viveka, Karya Akarya Viveka, Nitya Anitya Vastu Viveka, Atma Anatma Viveka, and Drik Drishya Viveka. They are all moral and spiritual disciplines. They are meant for practice. They are all to be practiced. So they have their specific purposes. They have their specific aims or objectives. And they bring their specific benefits. But Sadasad-vastu Viveka is not a discipline in that sense. It is not a discipline that has to be practiced. There is no question of purpose or objective or benefit here. It is just the state of enlightenment. A state of clarity of vision. This Viveka is the knowledge of the ultimate reality. Knowing what is really real. That is the result, the fruit of the practice of all these other Vivekas. Here, Viveka means knowledge, Viveka Jnana, Viveka Khyati. Knowledge arising from discrimination. It is the knowledge that dawns in the heart when one attains the direct vision of the Atma. So we see that Viveka can mean three things. First, it is the capacity of discernment, the ability to reason and understand, the intelligence to judge things correctly. This is a power that is unique to human beings. Second, Viveka is the spiritual discipline of discrimination, which enables a seeker after truth to see clearly, to see things as they really are, not as they appear to be, to distinguish between appearance and reality. Third, Viveka is also the knowledge of the ultimate reality that is the result of the practice of discrimination. So we have three things: the power, the process, and the product. Power, process, product. All three are called Viveka. So much meaning is hidden in this short word. So it is no wonder that Shankaracharya chose to call this work of his Vivekachudamani, because it deals with Viveka in all its three phases. As I said, the word Vivekachudamani literally means crest jewel of discrimination. In this book, we have a discussion of all the essential concepts of Vedanta which are taught in the Upanishads, Bhagavad Gita, and Brahma Sutras. The divinity of the soul, I am repeating, the divinity of the soul, the oneness of Atman and Brahman, and the unity of all existence. But because it is a Prakarana Grantha, a treatise meant more for mumukshus, spiritual seekers, because it is meant for them, its main thrust is on the Vedantic discipline of Viveka, discrimination between the real and the unreal. That is, learning to discern between what is changeless and eternal and what is changeful and temporal. Learning to distinguish between Atman, the self, and Prakriti, the not-self. Liberation of the soul, moksha. Moksha is the goal of self-knowledge or Atma-jnana. Or, to put it slightly differently, Atma-jnana is the means and liberation is the goal. That would be a more accurate way of saying it. But how to attain self-knowledge, how to attain Atma-jnana? By practicing the discipline of discrimination, separating the self from the not-self. This is the central task in spiritual life. The attainment of moksha through Atma-jnana, which is to be had by the practice of Viveka. I hope it is much easier to remember it this way. So, this is the main theme of the book. But in the course of the teaching, it also presents an overall philosophy of Advaita Vedanta in a simple, easily understandable way. As I said, it is like an instruction or it is like a user's manual. And a special feature is that the teaching is given in the form of a dialogue, a poetic dialogue like the Bhagavad Gita, between the Guru and the Shishya. So, in our quest after liberation, after moksha, the capacity to discern correctly, that is our most valuable resource. It is to emphasize the supreme importance of this quality of Viveka that Shankaracharya calls the book Vivekachudamani, because it is meant primarily for seekers of moksha. This samsara is the result of our own karma, good and bad. We can't work out the effects of all that karma in a single lifetime. And that is why we are born again and again. But what is it that causes us to act? Why do we act? Action is driven by desire, kama. We desire and we act in order to satisfy that desire. But why do we desire in the first place? We desire because we are dissatisfied with ourselves now. We somehow feel that we are incomplete, and we try to fill up that sense of incompleteness by identifying ourselves with things that are outside of us, external to us. We hope that they'll make us full. But contrary to our expectations, this wrong identification, this attachment, leads us into bondage. So, avidya, kama, karma, bandha. Ignorance, desire, action, bondage. This is the chain of cause and effect that binds us to samsara. It is all the mischief of ignorance, avidya. What is avidya? Confusing the Atman with things that are anatman. And the only remedy for ignorance is knowledge, vidya, which has to be acquired through discrimination, viveka. The knowledge that was cherished, valued the most by the Vedic rishis, our original spiritual teachers, the knowledge that they valued most was known as vidya. As a result of this vidya, the knowledge of reality, one attains bliss, freedom, immortality. It is quite different from ordinary knowledge, which is the product of the intellect. Vidya, in its original meaning, is supersensuous knowledge. Or to be precise, in its final stage, vidya is a supramental experience. To be precise, according to the Upanishads, one should acquire two kinds of knowledge, Aparavidya and Paravidya, lower knowledge and higher knowledge. The lower knowledge is the knowledge of the phenomenal world, and that includes also the literal meaning of the scriptures themselves. That belongs to lower knowledge. So in reality, lower knowledge is ignorance, because it does not lead to enlightenment, it does not lead to the supreme good, to moksha. The higher knowledge is, let me quote the words of the Upanishad itself, the higher knowledge is that by which the imperishable substance is known. That by which the imperishable substance is known. What is that imperishable substance? Brahman. Brahman is the goal of the higher knowledge, of Paravidya. So, the higher knowledge is called Brahmavidya, knowledge of Brahman. And this Brahmavidya was regarded as the foundation of all other forms of knowledge. Sarva Vidya Pratishtha. Still, the importance of the lower knowledge of Aparavidya is not neglected by the Upanishads. Not only not neglected, the Upanishads have asked us to positively cultivate it. It has been positively acknowledged. Why? Because it is helpful to our worldly welfare. It enables us to enjoy material prosperity here and happiness hereafter. Though in the end all its results are impermanent and unsubstantial, but still this experience has to be gone through. The rishis did not discourage secular knowledge or worldly happiness, because they were convinced that unless one learned the unsubstantial, the impermanent nature of the lower knowledge, that is to say, the unsubstantiality and the impermanence of this external world, unless one learned this through personal experience, one could not acquire the necessary mood, the right frame of mind that is required for the cultivation of the higher knowledge, Paravidya. It is only when we find by actual experience that Aparavidya does not help us attain true freedom, it is only then that we definitely, seriously commit ourselves to the cultivation of Paravidya. As we just heard, the culmination of this higher knowledge is the direct experience of Brahmanubhava. Anubhava means direct experience. Sakshatkara. It demands extremely austere disciplines, perfect renunciation, perfect self-control, perfect concentration. So only the greatest of renouncers, with the sharpest of intellects and the purest of hearts, only those people can gain this complete knowledge of Brahman, Brahmavidya. Because Brahman cannot be perceived, Brahman cannot be comprehended by the senses or by the intellect that depends on them. Only yoga, jnana yoga if you will, that is the context. Only yoga can give that subtleness of understanding by which spiritual truths that are beyond the range of the mind can be apprehended, can be understood. And the quality of Viveka is the yogi's best friend. The quality of Viveka is the yogi's best friend on their journey to Jnana and Moksha. A true friend who will accompany them at every step from first to last. So, I will conclude with a short prayer. May the light of that Viveka always brighten, always illumine our path towards moksha. I think we have now had a fairly long introduction to the book and its subject matter. In our next class, we will begin with our study of the text. Thank you.